You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode, I speak with ultra runner Karl Meltzer. He's done well over 100 ultra marathons, including winning 38 times at the 100-mile distance. He also holds the record for fastest known time in the Appalachian Trail, completing 2,200 miles in less than 46 days. We talk about that and other topics. I hope you enjoy. Karl, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's always great to be here and do another podcast. Yeah,
so let's start off with a quick little background on you. So, from reading about you, I guess you started out as, moving to Utah to become a ski bum, which, by the way, has been a dream of mine my entire life. I've never done it, but you eventually got introduced to ultra running, and that's become a passion of yours. I mean, how did you get introduced to ultra running? What was the start?
Well, first off, everyone should be a ski bum for a couple of years.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's cool. You get out and you gotta have fun and do stuff, but that was sort of my pathway to ultra running. I moved to Utah in 1989, again, just a ski bum, and I actually intended to go back to New Hampshire after that first season, but, I kind of hung around the mountains, and my friends had mountain bikes, and, the snow was starting to melt, and I did get a mountain bike, but then I started running with a friend, and he was just running through the mountains every day before work. I worked up at Snowbird. And I went with him one day, and that's really all it took to get me to start running again on the trails. And then that basically evolved into the local, trail races around here. Then it evolved to the Pikes Peak Marathon, which was a big race over in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then one of the employees that I worked with at the Keyhole restaurant at Snowbird, her husband had run the Wasatch 100 already about a dozen times in 1995 or 96. And she said, "Hey, you should run the Wasatch 100." And I was like, "Well, why would I want to run 100 miles? That sounds pretty stupid to me." But I was like, "Well, yeah." I kind of thought about it, and I did it, and I entered, and I finished. And it was a struggle. Don't get me wrong, but that definitely, that was me hooking on to the idea of being an ultra runner. And 2 years later, I won the Wasatch 100, and that was really when it clicked. Where I said, "Hey, maybe I can do this." And make it my career or do it professionally, or at least have a little bit of supplemental income through it, instead of having to work the standard full-time job kind of thing like most people go out and do. So that's kind of how it started, just from a friend mentioning it. But, once you learn that you're decent at something and you follow your passion, and that's what I basically did, is follow my passion.
Yeah.
And I'm not the kind of guy who worries about how much money he makes. I'd rather go do and enjoy my life how I want to. So ultra running was that path for me, and now 20 years later, I'm still doing it. Not necessarily living on the edge as I was when I was a ski bum, but at the same time, I'm really psyched that I followed my passion and stayed with that program instead of gone to do something I really didn't want to do.
Yeah. And so, for someone who hasn't run 100 miles before, and is thinking about going up to that distance, what advice would you have? Because, obviously you said your first one was tough, but then, only 2 years later, you ended up becoming, winning. And obviously you found something you're good at, but you did something right. So, what kind of advice would you give just for someone who's contemplating the distance?
Well, so my first 100-mile was the Wasatch 100, which is local, and it's a very tough, hilly, rocky, technical race. A couple things to do to help you on races like that is always try to train on the terrain that you're going to race on. In other words, if you're from Florida, running the Wasatch 100 may not be your best bet,
Yeah.
The treadmill won't do it. The treadmill won't do it for you, but the bottom line is then you might run something in the south that's flatter and a little bit easier. If you live out west or near your course that you want to run, train on that course a lot. That definitely helps you. It helps the time go by faster. That's really important to know every time you get to mile 70. You need to go over, Camel's Hump to get to mile 80. When you know it and you're familiar with it, it's always a little bit easier.
Right.
I think, that's one of the things. And the other real main component too is to break it up into pieces. So instead of thinking when you're standing on the start line, I've got 100 miles to go, like that's kind of a daunting task, So instead of doing it that way, it's better to break it up into pieces. And most 100-milers will have roughly between maybe 12 and 20 aid stations, something like that. If you break it down into aid stations and just count them off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right down the line, it breaks up your whole day and time goes by. It was just goes by a lot faster for me.
Yeah.
So breaking it into pieces, and training on the train that you're going to race on is really two things that really matter. And speed isn't necessarily your friend in hundreds. It's really, it's an endurance run, right? It's not a 10K speed race. So you want to stay in your comfort zone pretty much the whole time. If you fall out of your comfort zone and feel like you're cruising along a 10K pace or something like that at mile 20 of 100, then chances are mile 80 is not even going to get to mile 80.
Right.
Or it's going to hurt a hell of a lot. So it's really about pacing yourself. I mean, that's the old cliche to say that, but it really is the truth. That's why it's a cliche, is that it actually is the truth, that it all comes down to pace, and it all comes down to fueling yourself and nibbling and sipping and not ingesting too much food or water at the same time. It's all about this constant flow, like an IV drip.
Right.
I mean, that's how I tell my clients when I coach, is that, your food intake is think of it as an IV drip, one drip at a time, instead of like the whole bag at once,
Yeah.
It works a lot. I mean, it works for me, and hopefully it works for others.
Yeah, I compete in primarily triathlons, although I do some trail running as well. And in the Ironman distance, we always say that it's not the person who goes the fastest, but the person who slows down the least. I would imagine in a 100-mile race, it's even more true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The person who slows down the least. And that is so, I mean, I haven't even heard that before. That's kind of funny, but that's exactly right, is that the steady guy beats the rabbit. I always say the rabbit rarely wins. And every once in a while, that rabbit gets out there and the rabbit wins. But generally speaking, he's usually done, before he gets to the finish line. So
right.
That's a great quote you just made there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've done well over 100 ultras, and I mean, your, list of accolades is amazing. I mean, you've won, I think 38 100 milers. You did 600 milers in a year. I mean, it's really quite astonishing. And so one of the questions I have is just sort of, what are some of the, keys to your longevity in the sport and staying healthy? I mean, some of it's probably genetics, and, you can't apply it to everyone, but there must be some things you're doing, whether it's cross-training, diet, post or pre race type of stuff that must make it, must contribute. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, what's crazy is when I look back at my running career, I ran my first ultra when I was, I think 29 I was. It might have been 28 or 29, which was that Wasatch 100. Now, when I led up to that race, I wasn't thinking I was going to run 100 miles when I was 20, but I slowly increased my mileage, like very, 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 very slowly over a long period of time. So when I was in my 20s, I didn't run 140-mile weeks. I didn't run, I didn't even run 80-mile weeks, even that. I was looking at more like 40 to 50, and I was running all these races. And I think me gradually increasing my load over a long, super long period of time has helped me kind of keep going. I think overtraining is probably the word for the ultimate word for this, because I don't go overboard when I train. I really listen to my body, and if I'm feeling like I'm more fatigued than I should be, or if I'm running too many miles, or I'm just too darn tired, then I will back off the throttle and not train as hard for a little while until I get myself back to that level keel where I feel like every day I go for a run, I have something to give that run, as opposed to like just slogging through it. So it's really an overtraining and not getting myself too fatigued over all this long period of time, which also puts you more susceptible to injury. When your body's very fatigued, it exposes your weaknesses a lot more, I think.
Right.
So you try to stay at that level where you're not, stepping over the edge of the cliff,
Yeah.
If that makes any sense or not. But that's sort of how I've always treated my career. And, if I can't train as many miles as I thought I'd be able to leading up to, say, the Hardrock 105 weeks that I'm running, then, hey, so be it. I was able to do this, and this is what I'll give at the race.
Right.
I don't expect I try not to put pressure on myself. And, other people will put pressure on me, but I don't put pressure on myself to perform at a certain level anymore, because I'm really out there to just do it because I love to be out there.
Yeah.
And granted, I've won a lot, and I do believe that a lot of that has to do with genetics, as you said. But, I've won a lot and all these things, but not putting pressure on yourself is another really key thing, because, when there's pressure, you feel worse when you fail. When there's no pressure, it's like, well, it is what it is. I mean, I'm kind of this laid back guy that doesn't worry about stuff so much, and probably get that gist already from me, but It's really about just being out there and having fun. If you can have a good run, whatever your time is, look at your watch when you're done.
Yeah.
And then, I did it in 23 hours, or I did it in 28 hours, or whatever it might be. That's sort of how I treat my training and racing right now. And it's all about feel for me and not going overboard. And I think that's what's really kept me in the game for a long time. I mean, I've had injuries, I have issues. But I really listen to my body and don't force myself through the issues if I feel like it's going to slow down my training or slow down my, my progression towards a race or something.
Right. And so if you from a coaching perspective, I mean, obviously you hope not to have this dilemma, but I'm assuming based on your philosophy, it's better to have an athlete go into a race under-trained but healthy rather than overtrained and on the brink of injury. Is that sort of safe to say? I mean, is that kind of...
I think that's about safe to say. Yeah. I mean, no one wants to go to a race under-trained. And believe me, there's a lot of anxiety out there. Well, Karl, I haven't put in enough miles. I don't think I have. I said, well, and a lot of times that's usually because either life gets in the way, and believe me, for all of us, life gets in the way. You might miss a run here and there because you had to pick up your child at the airport or whatever, you know, so that's going to happen. But I think you can always use a race as a learning experience, whether you're in your best shape of your life or you're sort of just, you're not really feeling it. You can always use it as experience. So maybe you don't run your PR, but you go do a 50K or 50 miler, but you're probably going to learn something from that one race. You might learn about efficiency at an aid station. You might learn about what makes you feel better if your stomach goes south. You might learn those things, and that you can apply to what you learn there to the next race when you're in better shape. So, I mean, if if you haven't run at all, I'm not saying do it off the couch. I'm guilty of that a few times, but that's just, it's because we're addicted. But and I've done it right off the couch. But I'm not saying do it off the couch, but I think it's good to use it as a learning experience if you're really not that confident. Then it also takes pressure off yourself to perform at a level that you feel you could be at.
Right.
So I mean, that's just my attitude. I mean, I don't know if that's the right answer for some people, but that's just how I approach things. And if you approach things with just a grain of salt and do it and enjoy it, then you're probably gonna be just fine.
Right. Why don't we talk a little bit about some races and I guess adventures that you've done? And you've done all of or most of the big 100 milers. I mean, do you have a favorite one that kind of sticks out for you that is special to you, or one that you would recommend others to have on their bucket list?
There are a lot of great hundreds out there, and I've done a lot of the old classics for sure. There's the Hardrock, the Wasatch, the Leadville, and Western States, and the East Coast Massanutten. You got Grindstone. I haven't done Vermont; just hasn't fit in. Hardrock is always around that. I think my favorite race probably is Hardrock, because the community there, everybody's so into it, but everybody's so into the fact that it's not like this. I mean, it is a competition, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't feel so much like a competition when you're there. I think everybody's there really just to accomplish one goal, and that's to do the loop and get back to Silverton. And I think that's a really cool, special experience. But in terms of like courses, Hardrock is spectacular, but there's so many different courses out there. Western is a phenomenal course when it comes to like the speedster, You go to the East Coast, you go to a race like the Massanutten 100, which has been around for a long, long time. People underestimate it because they think, well, the East Coast, the hills aren't that big, and the climbs really aren't that long there. 1,000 vertical feet maybe for the longest one, but it's really, really rocky. So people get chewed up and spit out on that one because it's real rocky.
Right.
And I like that. I like the fact that it's technical. That's what I kind of thrive on. So that course is cool for me because the hills aren't that big, but it's really rocky. I like courses that go through the woods. I like stuff that, like the Pinhoti 100 in Alabama. You would think like, whoa, Alabama, what's that all about? But it's single track in the woods all the time. And then you look to some other stuff that I've done, the Appalachian Trail. I mean, that really, to me, is the ultimate track. 2,200 miles.
Yeah.
But to me, right, it's kind of daunting. And that's no race on that one, but only for me. But at the same time, like that really is people ask me my favorite trail. I mean, that's not the favorite trail. And every 2,200 miles of it makes it my favorite trail because it's this daunting green tunnel that never, ever ends. and that's why you don't really know what's around the next corner because you're in the woods. You don't have these big, massive views. There's definitely places where there's views, but there's a weird vibe and feel in the AT that you can feel no other place.
Right.
And to me, that it's crazy. It's weird to say that, but it is really crazy how that feel is. And that's my favorite trail for sure. I mean, Maine and New Hampshire are probably my two favorite sections, but that's 400 miles long. So there's all kinds of stuff out there in those states. But yeah, I mean, UTMB is another fabulous race if you want the big Tour de France kind of feel, where there's people on the side of the trail all the way top, the whole loop basically cheering for you. I mean, that route is spectacular because you're running around Mont Blanc. I mean, I don't know if it gets any better than that, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, Mont Blanc is pretty spectacular. If you've ever been to Chamonix or any of those areas in Switzerland or something like that, the Alps are on a whole different level than what we see here, even in Colorado. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. I've never been to Chamonix, but I've been over in like Zermatt in that area of the Alps, and it's just incredible, absolutely incredible. So I could only imagine. It's definitely one that looks absolutely amazing. So you touched on a lot of different things. Let's touch quickly on Hardrock, since that's upcoming, and obviously one that you've won it 5 times. And so what are some of the keys to success there? I mean, there's definitely some people have good days, bad days, whatever. But you've had a lot of success there. So what is it that makes someone successful at something as challenging as Hardrock?
Well, like I said before, I kind of take it with a grain of salt. And you kind of, when you're walking along at Hardrock, and let's just say you're middle of the pack, say a 40-hour finisher person, they're averaging 2.5 miles an hour. So if you can laugh at yourself and say, I'm racing at 2.5 miles an hour, then you're probably going to finish the race. Because if you think about it, it is a long, tough race. I mean, now, Jornay's running the thing in under 23 hours every year, which, he's running a lot more, but most of us out there, that it's the experience that you get on that course that you can get no other place, not even in Chamonix, because you're up higher, you're at a much higher altitude that just slows you down. I mean, like UTMB, the highest point is 7,900 feet. The lowest point at Hardrock is like 7,900 feet.
Right.
So like you're up higher all the time. You have these majestic views of the entire San Juans. It's just a magical place, I think it doesn't matter how fast you are there. I mean, I know I won 5 times, and granted, I went there to try and win those times I won. But again, now I'm not going to win the thing, so I'm just going to go there and have fun. And I think most people that go there and have fun are successful. What's very unique about Hardrock too is that being probably the toughest 100. I'm not going to say the toughest 100 in the world, because someone will call me out on something else, and that's okay. But being that tough, it's just, I don't know, it has a really high finisher rate. Like our finisher rate might be like 80%,
right?
Which is much higher than a race like say Rocky Raccoon, which is flattened in Texas. The finish percentage is actually lower, So you have a lot of. That's why they have, they call it a veterans race, because most people that do it are more experienced. They have better, maybe they're not better runners, but they have better mountain overnight experience. So that's what's kind of unique about Hardrock, is you have a pretty high finisher rate for as hard as the course is.
Yeah, which is kind of cool, because you said there's that community feel,
it's
and you
cool,
want. Yeah,
I mean, it's everybody wants to run Hardrock, and there's a reason why. It's a special place, and it's been cool to win it 5 times. I mean, that's definitely going to be my last, but Julian's got a couple more years, and he can pass me.
Yeah,
but it's just cool. I'd love to see it. I think there's always another turning of the page, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool to see it be a real competitive race up front, which it will be this year. I mean, I'm hoping to run top 10. I think that would be great for me, but I really think I can run under 28 hours, which should get me there. It's I don't know. It's a special place, and it may be the last year I run it. This will be my 9th finish if I do finish it. So maybe I'll have to be persuaded to go back to get my 10th. But at the same time, I've done it a lot, and it's nice to leave that spot for someone else who hasn't really done it before.
Right.
At the same time,
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I've done it a lot. I get it. I've been there and done it. So it's okay to give my spot away after this year.
Right. And so another thing you mentioned was the Appalachian Trail. You've obviously you have the fastest known time there in terms of 2,200 miles. I think less than 46 days. I can only imagine how difficult that had to have been. I mean, what was sort of your what was the genesis of you thinking of doing that? And I know you made a few attempts before you had a successful one. So that's really you really had to have your focus on it to not give up or try something different.
Well, yeah, we'll start with 2008 briefly, but I brought this idea up to backcountry.com. They were a sponsor of mine at the time. Hey, what about me doing the AT next year? You know, I mean, I just threw it out there. I wasn't really thinking I was going to do it. Really never planned. Never thought they would bite because it's expensive. You know, my whole idea was to have where'skarl.com. They're a website. People follow. They win prizes. They can track me, and it's kind of cool to watch, you know. And at the same time, I'm raising the bar for myself. I'm not raising the bar for anyone else. I really don't feel that's kind of what I would do, why I do things. But the AT was like a whole nother level of doing something extreme outside the 100-miler, you know. So I brought that idea up with them. Surprisingly, they bid on it. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going. So then we looked at the maps and we did some research, figuring it would be easy to, you know, catch me at road crossings, things like that. But it became a lot more complicated, and because your crew really has to be more efficient than the runner, because the runner just follows white blazes. It's super easy to follow the trail.
Right.
All you have to do is follow the blazes, right? But the crew they've got to do all kinds of different things. So 2008, I end up hurting my shins, and but I was able to finish the trail in 54 plus days. And I used it as a learning experience, kind of like I said, when you're not in shape for a shorter race, use it as a learning experience. So I did that. You know, I could have gone home with my tail between my legs, but I said, no, I'll sit for 4 days, let my shins rest, and try to get the inflammation down, which I did, and then continue on. So I used that as a learning experience. And then finally, and I went back to racing. 2013, I was like, man, I want to do the AT again, but I don't want the whole hoopla of the prizes and the tracking and all that stuff. So I did it with a buddy of mine, and he helped me out. He was great. But it didn't all mesh together. I fell behind, and I really wasn't in that great a shape when I started, truthfully. But at the same time, I fell behind, and I said, well, since I'm funding all this, and it's already cost me a fortune, I'm going to go home after 1,500 miles. I kind of regret the fact that I even went home, but it's over now, and I've forgotten about it. About 2 weeks after that, I got home. My contact from Red Bull asked, hey, do you want to do the AT one more time? And I was like, no way am I going back to the trail.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, but call me in 3 months. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, a little too soon.
Way too soon. And so, a couple months went by, and I said, well, how about we go 2016? So I have all of 2015 to not necessarily train for it, but to do recon. So I went back and forth to the East Coast 3 or 4 times, and it was all Red Bull was like, yep, do what you need to do. So I did that. I went through all of Maine on one push in 6 days just to kind of like be comfortable with Maine. Maine's a little remote and it's a little tricky in terms of logistics. So I changed my little plan through Maine a little bit, which made it so much better. Even though it's the first 6 days, it really did make a huge difference. When you go through Maine and New Hampshire and the Whites, logistics are tough because there's really long legs between stops. And unless you're sleeping on the trail, of course. So you have to sort of get to this point, a certain point by day 8 or 9 in order to start out well, So we did all this recon. I drove the trail on my Subaru for a whole month and went to every road crossing, where the stores are, where the gas is, where you can get some organic bananas or whatever the hell it was. It was just stuff like that. So I was really, really prepared. And then I had the right crew this time. I had the right people working for me, which was one of my good buddies, Eric Bells. My wife, Cheryl, my dad, of course, was fantastic. And then a couple other friends, Scott Jurek joined along, Dave Horton, Lou D'Onofrio. These are all friends Mike Mason, these are all friends of mine that I've known for a long, long time. And they know me, and they know how I run. They know that I don't need a pacer to cheer me on, that kind of thing. They were just there to help me on the support crew side of things. And they all came together great. So now we had this great team, and all we had to do was go 48 miles a day. Then it was sort of up to me.
Yeah.
And, without their help, I mean, honestly, I never would have had that. I never would have got it,
Yeah.
But I stayed positive. They always cracked a joke. They always made me smile. There was no negativity out there. And if there was, I never saw it, which was very important because a lot of times in 2014, I saw all the negative stuff that was going on. And we don't need to get into those details, but we could be here for hours. But at the same time, they were fantastic, I like to say it's 80% crew and 20% runner. And that's sort of how I feel about it. And they were amazing. Without them, I wouldn't have been as successful as I was. But that's, the AT for me was raising the bar for myself and to knowing that I could actually go back a third time and be successful. And that was really important to me to get that record. And now, I said, well, I'll put a stamp on my career and have that record. Well, okay, I stamped it, but but for some reason I can't really stop. It took me like 4 months to come back and recover from it, till I was sort of running at a normal, I call it back up to speed again.
Right.
But now I'm back up to speed, and we're going to Hardrock. I'm in pretty good shape, and I'm just kind of back on my own train again. And what's next? People have asked me what's next. I'm like, I don't know if there is a next.
Yeah.
I jokingly say I'll go northbound on the AT. Well, but that's probably not happening. But I just what's next is I just don't want to get hurt. I just don't want to be injured, and enjoy being out in the trails and enjoying doing what I do, doing it for a living.
Right. Yeah. And I think, it's really cool, as you mentioned. I mean, you did it twice, didn't break the record, and then a third time you did, which means you sort of set a goal and you kept going at it, which I respect so much, because there's a lot of people that would have said, hey, I was 500-600 miles away, didn't do it. This wasn't meant to be. Let's go do something else. But you came back and did it. So that's really cool. One thing you did mention, though, is, Scott Jurek was on your crew, and I know you helped him when he broke the record. I just think that's really interesting and cool. I know you guys are friends, but you also sort of, you were trying to go after his record and he still helped you. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, that just really speaks to kind of the friendship and culture of ultra running. And
yeah, I mean, Scott and I have been friends since about 1999 or 2000. When we both ran for a company called Montrail back in the day. I mean, especially back then, nobody was making any money, right? Nobody really made any money. So we really were out there just to race against our friends to see where we stack up, right? I mean, nobody was racing for that $10,000 check or $20,000 check. It was like we're racing for a medal or something, and it's just different, It's a little different these days. But yeah. Scott and I have always been good friends, and I didn't know Scott was going after the AT in 2015. I had some friends over at my house one night, and he's like, hey, do you know Scott's going at the AT? He's leaving it. He's starting in a couple of days. I'm like, huh? This is like Memorial Day weekend or something. I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, huh, I wonder why Scott hasn't told me. And when, all things said and done, is that Scott didn't tell me because he kind of knew that it was sort of like something that I wanted, and he didn't really want me to be bummed out that he's going to go and make an attempt at it. But then I contacted him and I said, hey man, I'll be out there. I can't come the first 2 weeks, but after that, I can come help you for a couple of weeks. And I can probably be a big help to you because I know the trail very well. I've done all this recon and all this stuff on it. And I can help Jenny crew. I mean, his wife was crewing. He would just tell her, hey, I'll meet you in 25 miles. He'd filter water out of the creek and sort of do some self-support stuff along the way. And I'm thinking, like, you want to break the record, you want to have a little bit better of a team, or at least a team of more than one person. So anyway, I said, hey, can I come out and help you? I won't get in the way. If I do, I'll just leave, no worries. And so I went and helped. I observed for a couple of days on kind of what they were doing. And then I said what Scott needed help with, because he had fallen behind. He hurt his knee early, so he had fallen sort of behind virtual Jen Farr Davis. So the idea for me was like, how about if I work on logistics and we'll try to get Scott caught back up to where he needs to be so he can get the record,
Yeah.
And then I had to leave because I was running Hardrock. So I jumped in my van on like June 10th, I think it was, and I just powered across the country in like 2 days and met up with them in, I think, Shenandoah National Park. And I was psyched to see him. Scott looked good. He was doing well. And I just wanted to help, and so I basically helped him with logistics and then some other random stuff. I didn't run with him all that much. He had plenty of people running with him, so he really didn't need me to be out there on the trail with him because I was training for Hardrock anyway. So I just kind of worked with logistics and just kind of helped him get caught up. By the time I got him to Massachusetts, he was technically caught up to where he needed to be. And now all I could do from there is warn him that New Hampshire and Maine are coming and you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
So, which is ugly, so I was psyched to help him. And then I didn't ask him to come help me. I told him I had already planned to go, as I said earlier in the conversation here, is that I had planned to go in 2016 long before Scott started. So it wasn't like Scott went out and broke it. Oh, I got to get Scott's record. It wasn't my competitive juices flowing at all on that. I was already doing it. So it was like I went and helped Scott. And I may have, I definitely learned a few things about crewing because I was actually on a crew for a while. That wasn't my intention, but it sort of happened by default. And then he said, hey, next year when you do it, man, I want to come out and help you. And I'm like, of course you can,
Yeah.
And he came out. I said, well, then how about at the end? Because that's when I might need that extra motivation. And Scott, when Scott and I run together, it's cool. We're just like, he motivates me to run. I probably motivate him to run. It's just good times. We're not over chatting each other. We just got and run and have fun. And having him there, knowing the trail too, it was all very familiar with him because it was only a year later. And he was really familiar with everything. So like he took a little bit of a load off my crew, which was who were pretty weary and tired, you know. Eric and my dad were about ready to be done, I'm sure. And then Scott jumps in and takes over these couple locations where Dad and Eric could rest a little bit more. And then Scott did a few things that my crew couldn't have done, where he ran in 10 miles and ran out with me 10 miles, drove my truck around, carried in my sleeping bag to sleep at a shelter. That was a really huge day, and that was in the Smoky Mountains. That's what basically propelled me ahead of virtual Jen Davis to be ahead, you know, to break the record. So Scott was a huge integral part of my record. You know, not everybody knows all the story of all the time that he was there, of course not, but he was a huge help. And, you know, if he went next year or this year to go break it again, I would jump in my van in a heartbeat and go help him.
Yeah. Oh,
and if there's anyone else,
cool.
and even if it wasn't Scott, it was even if it was somebody that I knew, like if Jeff Browning, for instance, I've been trying to get Jeff to do it. Come on, man, go north. You know, he's like, oh, well, you know, but if he went after it, I'd be the first person to jump on his crew if I could and help him all the way to the end.
Right.
Because I could be highly beneficial for them, you know, because I know that trail like the back of my hand right now so well that I know all the road crossings, you know, I recognize everything. It's easy for me. It's just the way we are, you know. I mean, if someone's going to break my record eventually, someone will do it. Right. And I'll probably be the first one to applaud. I think it's really cool to see crazy human performances like that. I mean, I know what that feels like, you know. I know what that 48 miles a day feels like and how demoralizing it can be and how it can like beat you down and make you cry, you know. It's cool to help others and it's cool to see others succeed.
Yeah. And I think it also brings really good attention to these trail systems because, you know, I live in New York City, so I'm in the urban environment and,
right.
You know, and I hear about these trails, I'm like, man, there's a trail that goes 2,200 miles. So cool. You know, let me get out there and check it out, that kind of thing. So, you know, I think there's a lot of positives.
It's right around your corner.
Yeah.
Fair Mountain is not that far.
Yeah. No, I go up there sometimes. So it's definitely pretty cool. So let's talk a little bit about the Speedgoat 50K at Snowbird. Mm-hmm. So you obviously set up as a ski bum over in Snowbird many years ago. And then, you know, now you've set up a race there, running race. So can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, where'd you come up with the idea? You know, how did you get into race directing? And, you know, that's obviously known as a notoriously hard course. So, and I know Snowbird, I've skied there, so I can only imagine. So
that all started, I stopped working at Snowbird in 2007. That same winter, just before I stopped working, the events director at Snowbird said to me, "Hey, Carl," I kind of knew him from skiing. He was a ski patroller too, so I knew him. So he comes, "Hey, you think you can we could do a race here in the next summer?" I said, I could put on a 50K here, and I bet you I get 100 runners, no problem. And he's like, "Really?" I was like, "Absolutely." You know, 2007, I was kind of my peak years, right? So I was known. So I'm like, "Yeah, I bet I can do that," you know. And that's when I got into race directing. I mean, I was never a race director. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I've worked a lot of banquet shifts at Snowbird. I mean, I know how it all works. A race is basically a big banquet,
right?
Right? It's kind of all it is. It really is. It's just an event, right? So I've run enough races to sort of figure that out. So John and I worked together. All right, well, let's try it. So John took care of all the permitting stuff, which was very easy. And I put the word out, and, you know, we learned the hard way that, you know, putting people's names in alphabetical order is probably a good idea for registration. Now, we didn't do that at the beginning either. So we learned a lot of things on that first year, but now and again, you know, the whole idea for that race is to make it hard, make it on terrain that I train on something different. A lot of the trail races around the U.S. at the time they're trail races. They're great. I mean, they're through the woods and they're rolling hills and they're not super hard. But I was like, well, you know, let's make something that's brutal. Let's make people want to swear at me when they're finished. but people, you know, the first year it happened and they crossed that line. They're like, oh my God, that was just off the charts. Like, it was ridiculously hard. And I'm like, exactly. But then they keep coming back, you know, and that sort of started the trend of making races harder in this country. You know, like I raced over in Europe just before that. And I'm like, you know what? I mean, you know, this is the hard stuff. This is cool, you know?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea and the brainchild of like, well, let's make it as hard as possible. And then a couple years later, we were able to use more terrain behind Snowbird, which is Mary Ellen Gulch. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you look over the back of Snowbird, out to the right and behind the Twins, the highest peaks on the right.
Yeah.
There's a whole other gulch back there, and now we run all the way down there. And we weren't able to do that the first couple of years. So I had to wiggle a course out of the, the front and back side of Snowbird, which is hard to do for 30 miles. But now that we can use that area back there, then I was like, then I was like licking my chops. So, yeah, right. So that was my thought process. And, and now 10 years later, it's an established race. Snowbird is a fantastic host for us. And, I kind of get to do what I want to do when I go there, because again, I worked there. So I know all the ins and outs of how things work. Worked there 17 years. Even some of the same people are still working there. So it's a really great fit for me. And, I'm psyched to have a really hard race. And, Hoka 1-1 has been the sponsor of it since they started their company.
Yeah.
And without their help too, without them, I don't have a bigger prize purse either. So I've generated a lot of buzz about it, and a lot of buzz sometimes about the money, but mostly about how hard the race is. And it makes me feel good when people swear at me across the line, like, no, people work hard.
Yeah.
And it took them 9 hours to run 30 miles.
Yeah, you've done your job.
It's like, oh my God. Yeah, it's like, think about that for a second. Like 9 hours, like never takes 9 hours to run 30 miles. Well, it does here, So it's a great race for anyone who really wants to challenge himself and make it tough. I mean, we have cutoffs, which aren't the easiest things to make for some of the people that are a little bit towards the back, but that's part of the challenge. That's just part of the way it is, part of the way I am. So I kind of modeled it after the way my brain works, the way I'm wired.
Right. And what do you think differentiates, people who are successful at your race? I mean, is it just sort of someone who's coming in obviously very fit and ready, but also just knowing they're going to go to war that day and just prepared for the worst? Is that sort of the mentality you need to be in to kind of thrive there?
Well, you have to expect it to hurt, I mean, if someone's coming in blind and they haven't seen anything about the course, I've had people been pretty pissed off at me because, hey, I didn't expect this, like, well,
yeah.
Sorry, and that especially on the first couple of years was sort of like that. But I mean, people know its reputation now. Like, wow, this one's really tough. I want to do that one. I get a lot of first-time speedgoaters. We'll call them first-time speedgoaters. That they're like, oh my God, this is definitely the toughest 50K I've ever run. And I'm not the guy that's going to go out there and say, oh, it's the toughest in the world. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure I can bring you a course to Europe that's probably harder. But at the same time, it's like, it's cool that people are psyched about finishing that really tough course. So people cross the line, they're exhausted, every single one of them, and it's a really good feeling for them to say, wow, I did that. I went all the way up Baldy 3 times, or I went over this peak twice, or whatever. It's so much different than that regular 50K, the regular kind of rolling trail 50K.
Right.
It just challenges people, and I try to make the atmosphere good at the end. Everybody just gets beer and pizza. You got to bring your own beer because we're in Utah, but you can bring it.
Yeah.
But pizza, and the standard kind of thing that I do. It's kind of my race, so I run it in the way I want to run it. And Snowbird allows me to do that. So it's like, it's a perfect fit, man. It's a really good time. People have a good time. And then we have the vertical mile race, which is the day before, which hasn't really caught a lot of traction on, but it's probably the most unique hill climb in the country, where you run to the top of the Proven Express lift, which is very close to the summit, and then you take the lift down, and then you run back to the peak, and that's the finish line. So you have 2 big climbs, right? And with a lift ride down, where your time doesn't count, time stops when you get on the lift. So, there's no race in the country like that at all. And it's kind of a shame that we only have like 25 people in it right now, because it could be an incredible hill climb race where, the route up to the top is different for both legs too. So it's 4 miles the first leg and 2 miles the second leg. The second leg is basically straight up the ridge.
Yeah.
And the first leg is mostly a faster service road and some single track. So it's a really cool race. I don't know if I'm going to have it next year just because of, interest, unfortunately. But if there was a way I could make that race bigger, I'd be all over it, because it really is super fun. And then to do both races at the same time, over the weekend is, the better challenge.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine.
Make yourself really tired Friday night and then race Saturday morning. So anyway, that's raising the bar for those speedgoaters, you know?
Oh, yeah. So one final area I wanted to touch on before we finish. So you obviously run, you race direct, and we alluded to the fact that you do some coaching in some of our earlier conversation, but you do offer coaching services and things. So can you just talk about that a little bit? I mean, what's your, general kind of approach there, and what kind of athletes are you working with, and just, what people can expect from working with you in terms of your style and such, because ultimately picking a coach is all about the kind of having the right, personality match and the right communication.
Right. I mean, not everybody is the perfect coach, right? I think what's important for people to learn about me is that I like to try to teach runners to, number one, listen to themselves. Like when I talked about, listening to your body and training and that kind of stuff, I sort of like to teach that so they can almost take it on their own later. I think that's really important for people to learn how to understand some of my concepts. It really isn't so much about your speed. It's really about your mental power too. I mean, I'm not the kind of guy that has a lot of speed, but I can mentally get through a lot of things. I mean, what I do is I do biweekly plans for people, which I tweak all the time, and I try to work around their lives. Everybody works different jobs and things like that. So as long as I have that information, I can totally try to work it into their schedule where it's the most effective time to run, or the time not to run so hard, the time to run hard, things like that. I teach people to try to learn how not to overtrain, because a lot of people just want to overtrain. Many people will do, if they're averaging 30 miles a week, they'll want to jump right to, 80 miles a week because they're running a 100-miler. Well, that's not really the right angle to do it.
Yeah.
You're just going to risk injury, It's really about running smart. I try to teach people how to run smart and how to get the most out of what they have. I teach all different ranges of athletes, from people that win to people that are near the back of the pack. It doesn't really matter to me, because if I can help you improve in one form or another, then it was success. I think everyone has to understand we all have certain abilities. And like if someone were coaching me and said, "Hey, Karl, we want to try to get you to run a 2:30 marathon," I'm like, it's not possible because my body doesn't do that. But put me on a mountain and I can do better. So I try to work towards the strengths, find out what people's strengths and weaknesses are, and then we try to improve on those things as best as we can for the environment that we're in. I mean, it's like I said, it's hard to train in Florida for the Leadville 100 or the Hardrock 100 because you just don't have that terrain.
Yeah.
So try to teach people to make smart decisions too on like where they're going to race and what they want to do. I mean, there's a lot more to coaching than just, say run 7 miles, run 8 miles,
oh, yeah.
Or run some intervals or whatever. It's really about learning about yourself and what your body can do. And if I can help people in that way, they're going to be more successful than they'd ever imagined, because that's really what it's about.
Right.
The gadgets, the Strava, that's all fun and games, and it is cool. And don't get me wrong, there's so much data out there now that can be produced by a tiny little watch or by a heart rate monitor or something like that. But in mountain running, and that's more or less what I specialize, is the longer distance on trails. I mean, I'm not your guy for the 5K on the road. I mean, sure, I can put a plan together and sort of work you towards getting a little better, but it's still not what my specialty is. I think we all have specialties. Mine would be the 100, the longer distance, the 100-miler. I've had many people contact me about, hey, I'm going to do the AT next year. Got any tips? I'm like, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a thru hiker. I didn't camp overnight every night, so I don't have the best tips for that. But in terms of like how to strategically maneuver around, through the areas and find where the stores are and things like that, I know all that kind of info. So I've had people ask me about that too. I just specialize more at the tough trail mountain hundreds, is for, if that's what you really want, then I can probably help. But the 5K thing isn't really my ticket, but,
yeah. So a question. So if someone like myself, I'm in New York City, I obviously have Bear Mountain, that's not too far away. But if I'm like, hey, I want to go and do a mountain ultra, I don't know, next summer or whatever. I mean, how would you go about helping someone who's sort of not in the mountains to prepare? I mean, obviously you probably have to travel a little bit. I would go up to Bear Mountain, but what else would you prescribe? I mean, some stair climbing. I don't know. I'm just trying to think through kind of how you would deal with someone like me.
Yeah, you could pack up and move to Colorado.
Yeah, I could convince my wife to.
All right, but that's the joke. That's the joke of the day. But no, realistically, so if you're in New York City and you want to run a mountain 100, yeah, I mean, you want to get on that treadmill and go straight up and down. I mean, Central Park doesn't cut it, right?
Yeah, no, there's just
the hills they talk about, the New York Marathon. Yeah, whatever. Sure, you want to go out to Bear Mountain. It would be if this is possible. Ideally, you would go out to, whether it's Colorado, Utah, or whatever you're going, is go out to that course and see it just once. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm getting into. Don't look at the pictures. Looking at the pictures and the video that people put on the web all the time, it's okay. But until you really go there and see it once, even if you went for just like 4 days, just to get an idea, that if you're going to commit to running this 100-miler in the West, you can probably, and you live in New York City, you can probably fly out there and do it and check it out. But I mean, you're going to want to do things like get on the stair, maybe not the stair climber. I'd rather see treadmill, but you need to condition those body parts like you're running on a mountain. No place does it better than the mountain. So I would encourage you to get out to Bear Mountain or somewhere on the AT or somewhere where there's trails like that.
Yeah.
It isn't always the AT is always reliable because it's pretty tough across the board. But, I always say the AT is easy because it is just, a straight line from Maine to Georgia. But there's other stuff out there too. If you investigate a little bit around Hunter Mountain, I don't know how far is Hunter Mountain from New York City. 2 hours?
Yeah, but something like that. I mean, without traffic, it's less, but
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You got to assume there's traffic, right? So something like that. You have to go out and make the commitment to get out to places like that to get on that type of terrain. I mean, that's just the bottom line. I mean, you can go uphill on a treadmill and you can say you do 5,000 vertical every day, but if the treadmill is moving, then you're not really pushing off like you're really pushing off, It's
right.
not the same. It's like sort of doing the work for you. So, I mean, I just have to, encourage people to get out and make that extra commitment, that extra little bit of a drive, or whether you take even a train out there. I don't know if that's even possible, but something like that. I mean, and then go around, and when you run around in Central Park, there must be some kind of small trails around here and there.
Oh, yeah.
Is there? I don't know.
Yeah, there are.
Right.
They're just not super long climbs, but there's definitely some trails.
Right. Right. So you get out on that stuff. Even though it's not that much, it's still dirt. It's still dirt, which is a little bit slower than pavement. So you want to get out there and mix it up and try to get on that stuff as much as you can. Try to simulate it as much as you possibly can. And then when you go, when you go out to, let's just say it's the Leadville 100. I mean, Leadville, the town is at 10,000 feet. So the altitude is going to ruin you, and you can't sleep in a tent. You can't breathe in any apparatus to make your lungs work better at altitude. The bottom line is there's not less oxygen there. It's just more pressure on your body to take oxygen in. So it's a whole different thing. So you basically either show up the day before, so you shock your body and body doesn't even know it, then it's over, or you go for a couple of weeks early and acclimatize.
Right.
So there's a lot of people, they'll go a week early just so they can go see the course that week early, but that actually works against them.
Yeah, that's the worst case scenario,
physically,
right? Yeah.
It's the worst case scenario. So, and a lot of people don't necessarily believe that, and they're like, really? How can that be worse? Well, that actually, your body has to need a little time to adapt. So, little tips like that can help, but going there to look at it first, just to get an idea of what you're getting into, and then coming back and try to simulate it as much as you can. Even if you don't have that much to work with, you work with it as much as you can, and then you accept what you have when you get there, and you just use it as a learning experience. The first time you go there, it's impossible to put a time frame on Leadville, because Leadville is not a hard course. It's just at 10,000 feet or higher. So
yeah.
So it just works. That's what's hard about it. Otherwise, the trail is pretty easy. 15,000 feet of climb for 100 miles really isn't that much. But the bottom line is, the altitude is going to get you. So you sort of have to accept what it is, and then the second time, if you go back a second time, you know so much more the second time. I never run my best race the first time I ran it. Never. You learn from it, and then you can try to adapt to it and then do it and see what happens.
Right. No, that makes sense. Well, Karl, I mean, thank you so much for those tips and, sharing some of your race stories and talking about all the different things we spoke about. I mean, it's super interesting. I really appreciate your time, and, good luck this summer at Hardrock.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. It's always interesting to talk about it.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.